song really fits the topic today. We're continuing with our series we've been doing, actually the second to the last of our series today, The Quest for Peace and Justice. Today we're talking about war, and the world needs a little more love if we're going to have a lot less war. I got this title, The Quest for Peace and Justice. Actually, I said last week that I brazenly stole it from the title of a lecture that was given by Dr. Martin Luther King when he accepted the Nobel Peace Prize in 1964, and I've been wanting to do a talk on that entire lecture for quite some time, so this has been my first opportunity to really get into it and some of the profound and eloquent ideas that he expresses in that lecture. The primary theme that Dr. King is talking about there is the gap that has developed between our external technological and material pursuits and our internal spiritual pursuits. He calls it our moral and spiritual lag as a culture. This is how he describes it. Every man lives in two realms, the internal and the external. The internal is that realm of spiritual ends expressed in art, literature, morals, and religion. The external is that complex of devices, techniques, mechanisms, and instrumentalities by means of which we live. Our problem today is that we have allowed the internal to become lost in the external. We have allowed the means by which we live to outdistance the ends for which we live. I said profound and eloquent, right? That's beautiful. And he goes on to say that this, in turn, is the cause of three larger problems that have plagued humankind: racial injustice, poverty, and war. So the topic today is war. And when I was reading the transcript of his lecture, I was struck by this very real sense of urgency in the things that he was saying about war. And I think that's because it was a very different world in 1964. Think about what was going on in 1964. First of all, we were at the height of the Cold War with the Soviet Union. Both the United States and the USSR, they were armed to the teeth with nukes, which created what someone called the balance of terror. You've heard of the balance of power, maintaining the balance of power. Somebody called it the balance of terror. And I recall seeing political cartoons like this. Kennedy and Khrushchev arm wrestling, each one sitting on a thermonuclear warhead. Or this one here showing the world with two tanks pointed at the head. Again, the balance of terror. There it is. I remember that. I remember that very clearly. 1964. China had just detonated its first nuclear bomb in October of that year. Dr. King gave this lecture in December of '64. China got the bomb in October of 1964, which was a very scary development, and just in time for Halloween, apparently, back then. The arms race, it was in full swing, and the horror of Vietnam had just started. 1965 was when we first started sending regular combat troops into harm's way. So that was starting. The memory of the Cuban Missile Crisis, 1962, that memory was still fresh. It seemed as if World War III was a very real possibility and utterly unthinkable in the nuclear age. Am I being too dramatic? Or do you think I captured the zeitgeist of the mid-60s fairly accurately? I was old enough to remember, and I can recall the tension and even the fear, although we didn't have this constant barrage of pundits on TV like we do today trying to scare people for fun and profit. There was more chaos to come, though. There were anti-war protests, which began to ramp up not too long after that. The civil rights movement, the protests, the riots in our major cities, it makes this era look positively calm and safe by comparison, doesn't it? If you lived through it, think about it. There really is no comparison. And there are some here who lived through World War II and the Vietnam era. Put those two together and look at today, and again, no comparison. It's one of the reasons why I'm a student of history, because it proves time and time again that no obstacle is insurmountable. No obstacle is proven yet to be insurmountable, and some of them look far worse than anything we're facing today. We have gotten through far darker times than this. Far darker times than the current cast of idiots and crazy people who are trying to run the world, or I should say ruin the world, and history tells us that they will not prevail. Considering everything that went on from 1939 through the 60s, we've made great progress, which is what we need to focus on. There's a reason why our mission statement here contains the line about advancing a positive message. We got that from all of you, you know. 2008, we did an extensive survey based on a process called appreciative inquiry, and one of the major themes that came out of that interview process was so many people were attending this Unity Center and others because of our positive message. And having a positive message is something entirely different from positive thinking. Positive thinking is too often associated with magical thinking and denying reality. We don't want to do that. A positive message is about finding and then focusing on the things that motivate us. Things that make us want to act, that helps us to see that we've been making progress and we've been improving our lives, and therefore we can continue to do so. We want to have a positive vision of the future of humankind and human potential, which can be hard to come by in a world where our political dialogue has become toxic and our leaders delight in using incendiary and homicidal rhetoric, while real homicidal religious fanatics like ISIS and Al-Qaeda are in the headlines. We get that constantly over and over and over again. And it's easy, so easy to blame the sensationalistic media. I myself have done that on several occasions. Blame the media because all they want to do is give us the bad news. They're programming us. It's easy to become cynical and frustrated about the perceived lack of good news in the news. Who wants to be frustrated and cynical? Show of hands. Anybody just love that feeling of being frustrated and cynical? Nobody wants to be frustrated and cynical, and yet I see these different Facebook memes circulating which suggest that we are being manipulated and controlled into being distracted and uninformed, as if we were sheep. I refuse to buy into that idea. People aren't sheep. We can evaluate what we hear and what we read. It's called critical thinking, and it is ours by right of consciousness. I've heard from people today who say that it's so hard today to tell what is accurate or true from the inaccurate and false. Baloney. It does take some effort, but the facts and evidence are available if we are willing to look and stay objective and put aside our pre-existing ideology and dogma, refusing to engage in motivated reasoning. Motivated reasoning is a way of going about finding information. We look for it in order to prove what we already believe, instead of finding out what the information is and then evaluating it dispassionately. It's hard, but it's very, very possible. The reason that we have a positive message is we want to create a positive perspective where we think such things are possible. And we want it to be evidence-based. Even when the appearances tell us otherwise, a positive perspective helps us to focus on the power that we already have to turn things around. When the talking heads are telling us that war and violence is everywhere and disease and disaster are right around the corner, we have the right to ask a question. In fact, I think we have an obligation to ask one very important question. And that question is, what evidence do you have to support that? You're making a claim. What evidence do you have? Where are the facts? Those stubborn facts, as John Adams once called them. Maybe what you're telling us is true. Maybe it isn't. But why should we simply accept your word for it? And the talking heads do such a great job of giving the appearance of authority. They call it gravitas. Don't bother asking me for the pesky details. Can't you see I'm wearing a suit? And I'm up here talking on the TV. The TV box. They count on us to behave like a nation of bobbleheads. Every now and then, preferably every single time, we need to look at the evidence, and I mean all of it. We're not afraid to look at the negative stuff. We're not afraid to acknowledge the negative stuff. For example, human beings really did invent and deploy nuclear weapons, the most destructive devices that we've ever come up with. But we've managed to avoid using them for over 70 years now. We guard against it. We work very hard. We remain vigilant. We've done a decent job of preventing nuclear war. And conventional war is down as well. Way down. Here's the facts. Check out this graph. That bottom line shows interstate wars, wars between sovereign nations since 1945 all the way over there on the left side. Notice it bumps up and down, up and down, up and down, but since maybe around 2004 it's pretty much flatlined. That's a remarkable improvement over what used to happen hundreds of years ago. Now the not so good news, remember we look at it all, is that top line which shows what's been going on in terms of civil wars around the world since 1945. Spiking there about 1990, and then it looks like it's really dropping, but uh-oh, look out, 2015 is starting to jump up again a little bit. That is happening, and what do we do about that? Intervene? Jump in the middle of it? Oh boy. One of the things that they've demonstrated is that one of the sure ways to bring down the incidence of civil wars out there is to have a country that is implementing democratic reforms. Not by force, but when they discover democratic reforms for themselves, people get a voice and civil wars decrease. So what do you think has been happening in terms of countries implementing democratic reforms around the world? Next slide. Since 1945, it's more than quadrupled countries around the world that are instituting democratic reforms. That's the kind of positive information that gives us reason to hope. It's the kind of positive information that motivates me and makes me think, yeah, there are things that we can do. You know, hopelessness and sitting around on our hands and moaning and wailing, that doesn't do any good. We want to find something that will energize us and to help us to move forward. This is good news for humankind, but you have to make some effort to find it. It motivates me, and when it comes to taking action, this is what Dr. King recommended back in 1964, what he recommended that we need to do moving forward. He said, I venture to suggest to all of you and all who hear and may eventually read these words, that the philosophy and strategy of nonviolence become immediately a subject for study and for serious experimentation in every field of human conflict, by no means excluding the relations between nations, It is, after all, nation states which make war. We will not build a peaceful world by following a negative path. It's not enough to say we must not wage war. It is necessary to love peace and sacrifice for it. We must concentrate not merely on the negative expulsion of war, but on the positive affirmation of peace. Denials and affirmations. Yeah. You deny the power of war, the truth of war, and affirm the positive vision of peace. Got to do both. Got to do both. We will not build a peaceful world by following a negative path. I love that line. And that negative path is easy to see today. The negative path is built on a carefully crafted message that we are still getting, which tells us that violence is the solution to life's problems. Violence is good. Weapons are good. They make you powerful. They solve your problems. Got to be strong. Got to be tough. Got to talk tough. Got a problem? Get violent. Get a gun. Get a weapon. Use your fists. Throw a rock. Whatever it is you have, because if you don't, they're going to walk all over you and they're going to laugh at you. That's the biggest part of the problem, is this idea that violence is redemptive, that violence is always the first and best resort, the first and best response to any situation, that violence is always an appropriate way to respond to an insult or a slight. That is a really, really dangerous message to put into the subconscious mind. But that's where it lodges. When you get barraged with it and you're not paying attention and you're not challenging it and not looking for the evidence and the facts, it gets lodged in the subconscious mind, which is why Dr. King recommended crafting a positive message, a positive affirmation of peace. And when it comes to peace, I said before that Dr. King, somebody once said of Dr. King that he led the civil rights movement with the Bible in one hand and the Constitution in another hand. And that's because in the Gospels we get a powerful, powerful message of peace and nonviolence in the words of Jesus, which is why I would think that when it comes to crafting a positive message of peace, evangelical Christians should be leading the way in this country. They insist that this is a Christian nation that should be ruled by Christian values. And to that I say, great. Let's start with the values that we hear in the Sermon on the Mount, for example. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about the Sermon on the Mount next week. But let's hear about how to be peacemakers. Jesus reserved his greatest praise for the peacemakers. They were the ones who would be called children of God, the peacemakers. Let's hear more about how to be peacemakers, how to be more humble, how to be more merciful instead of arrogant, judgmental, and violent. Instead, the evangelical leaders in this country give us a manifesto called the Nashville Statement, bashing the LGBT community. Yeah, thanks for that. I'm sure we can all sleep better now. Another thing they're really good at is predicting the end of the world. Did you all know that you're not supposed to be here today? The world was supposed to end yesterday, according to this guy, because of something book of Revelation, and God is mad at us for something. Seems like we're all still here, and they wonder why their numbers are crashing. Consciousness is not an inert force. We have to do something with it. We have to craft the contents of consciousness. We have to direct it in a positive way instead of letting in the divisive and the nonsense. We get lots of messages thrown at us, lots of people vying for our attention, vying for our support, our money. Some of them want our votes, so we need to listen. But how do we discern between what is going to lead to greater peace, unity, and understanding, and what is going to divide us and lead to greater disharmony and violence? Well, it does start with denials followed by affirmations. And here's a powerful denial process that I'm calling the power of no. You've heard the power of now? Well, this is the power of no. The power of no. We listen to what is being said, and then we say no to those who want us to be afraid of everything and everyone. We say no to people who speak in violent metaphors. We say no to those who want to label and exclude people in order to make it easier to marginalize them and demonize them and blame them for our problems. We say no to those who want to make us feel inadequate and weak so they can manipulate our emotions in order to stoke the flames of violence. All of that stuff we say no to, and I've given you those in a little handout in your bulletin if you want to take a look at them later. That is the denial phase of it. Now, next week we're going to wrap up this series and we're going to go on to the affirmations phase of the equation. It's the end of the Jewish High Holy Days next weekend, so I thought we would explore the Jewish concept of Tikkun Olam, which means healing the world. See you then.